There were 15 people at that table. My son-in-law reached across it, pulled my dead wife's reading glasses off my face while I was still reading the third page of something they wanted me to sign, and let them go. They hit the tile. It is not a loud sound, a pair of glasses hitting a floor, but the room had gotten quiet enough that everybody heard it. Then he pushed his chair back to stand up and be helpful about it, and the caster rolled over the left lens, and the frame folded the way a frame folds when it is not coming back. Marianne wore those glasses for 11 years. The left arm had been broken since the March before she died, and I mended it myself with a length of 40-pound monofilament, twisted twice and pulled tight, because she said the line held better than those little screws. It was the last thing I ever fixed for her. I got down on one knee, 70 years old, in a room where my wife's name was leaning against the drywall in plastic wrap, waiting on the sign company, and I picked the pieces up off the floor while 15 people watched me do it. My son-in-law laughed. Not a cruel laugh. A managing laugh, the kind you use on somebody else's toddler in a grocery store. He said, "Sorry about that, Emmett. I'll get you a new pair. They're $12 at the drugstore." And then my daughter, my only child, who I raised, whose mother wore those glasses to read her a Harry Potter book out loud across one entire winter when she had mono and missed 9 weeks of school. My daughter looked at what I was holding in my hand, and she said this, "They're glasses, Dad. Mom's been gone 3 years. You are making this so much harder than it has to be." Nobody at that table said one word. 2 of them were investors. 1 was a lawyer. The man directly across from me had been our neighbor on Piedmont Heights for 9 years, and had eaten my wife's rhubarb pie every summer for 6 of them. He looked at his plate. They believed they had just watched an old man come apart in public with nobody on his side of the table. They were right about the table. There was nobody on my side of it. What none of them knew, including the lawyer, is that I spent 41 years of my working life reading other people's paperwork for a living, and that 2 weeks from that night, every person in that room was going to find out which one of us had read theirs. Before I tell you how that happened, let me know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I read them, and it matters to me more than you would think. And if you have ever been the person on one knee picking something up off a floor while your own family waited for you to finish, stay with me, because this whole channel is people like us. Welcome to Dad's Honor. I'll say up front that some elements of this story are fictionalized for the telling. Any resemblance in names or places is coincidence. What is underneath it is not. Now let me go back, because the glasses are not the beginning. The beginning is 3 years and 8 months earlier, at a different kitchen table, with 2 coffee cups on it and a folder between them. My name is Emmett Rusk. I am 70 years old and I live in Duluth, Minnesota, in a house on Piedmont Heights that my wife and I paid off in 1998 and celebrated by driving down to the Chinese place on Central and ordering the family dinner for 2. For 41 years, I was a property and casualty claims adjuster for a regional carrier out of Superior. 41 years of reading other people's losses. A garage fire in Cloquet. A roof that came off in a straight-line wind in one piece and landed in a neighbor's yard like a playing card. A man in Hibbing who reported $11,000 of tools stolen out of a truck bed and who had photographs of every single one of them and who had photographed all $11,000 of them inside a garage that he had sold 2 years before. That is the entire job, if you want to know what it is. Somebody hands you a stack of paper and tells you a story about the paper. Your work is not to decide whether you like them. Your work is to read what is actually on the page and see whether it says what they just told you it says. I retired at 66 with a pension, a wall clock, and a handshake from a regional vice president who called me Emmett with an I. I did not correct him. It was the last day. My wife's name was Marianne. For 22 years, she was the kitchen manager at Homecroft Elementary, which means she fed 400 children a day and knew which of them came back to the window for seconds because they were still hungry, and which of them came back because they liked her. She had a way of telling those 2 apart. She never wrote it down, and I never asked her to. She died on the 2nd of February at 4 in the morning, in her sleep, of a stroke, next to me. I woke up at 6. I am going to be exact about that interval, because I have thought about those 2 hours more than I have thought about anything else in my life. We had 1 child, Corinne. She was 41 that year. Here is the part I have to tell you plainly, because everything that came after grew straight out of it. Marianne bought a 30-year term life policy in 1989 when she was 39 years old and paid $31 a month on it out of the grocery envelope for 26 years. I did not know it existed until a woman from the insurance company called our house 11 days after the funeral. $200,000. There was another $17,000 from the group policy through the school district. $217,000 from a woman who bought her winter coats at the thrift store on Central Entrance and washed out sandwich bags. 6 weeks after we buried her, I sat down at my daughter's kitchen table and I gave her every dollar of it. I need you to understand that this was not a hard decision, because a lot of people watching this are going to assume somebody talked me into it. Nobody did. Corinne had wanted a restaurant since she was 19 years old. There was a space in Lincoln Park coming out of a lease, an old fish house with a good hood system and bad flooring, and she had run the numbers on a legal pad 4 separate times in front of me. She was good at it. She was better at it than her mother and I were ever good at anything. And she was gray and flat and 41 years old, and she had lost her mother, and I had $217,000 that came out of a grocery envelope, and I could not name one thing on this earth that money was for if it was not for that. She cried at the table. She held onto my hand with both of hers and she said, "I'm paying you back, Dad." I told her not to be ridiculous. Then I slid the folder across. I said, "You have to sign this." The lawyer set it up as a note instead of a gift. Otherwise, the IRS calls it a gift, and you and I are both filling out forms all spring. That is word for word what I said, and every word of it was true. She signed in 3 places. She did not turn a single page. And I want to be honest with you here, because I have heard how this sounds. There was no plan in it. None. I had it drawn up that way, because that is how I would have drawn up anything, for anyone, after 41 years of watching the paper outlive the conversation. A man who has read documents his whole life does not stop reading them because the woman across the table is his daughter. I drove home and put the original in the second drawer of the filing cabinet in my basement, in a folder I labeled by hand. March 19. The restaurant opened that June. She put her mother's name on the sign in raised white letters, and on opening night she stood me underneath it, while a photographer from the neighborhood paper took our picture. I still have it in the hallway. 3 years and 5 months later, on a Monday night at 11 o'clock, my phone went off against the kitchen table. The first thing I did was reach for her glasses. Not the phone, the glasses. It was the first message from my daughter in 5 months. It was 11 words long, and I did not need the glasses to read it. Dinner Friday, at the new place. 7. Bring the money. C. No question mark. No hello. Just the initial at the end, the way you sign off to a vendor. I typed back one word. Okay. Then I sat in that chair in the dark for another 40 minutes, and around midnight, the plow came up Piedmont and threw salt against the storm door for the first time that season. 4 days later, I drove down to Lincoln Park with my wife's glasses folded in my shirt pocket. And I want you to know something before I tell you what happened at that table, because it is the part that still costs me. I went down there to give her the money. Thanksgiving was the Thursday. I ate at home. I made a chicken thigh, and I watched the second half of the football game with the sound low. And at 4 in the afternoon, I got a photograph on my phone of my daughter's table with 14 people around it, and a caption that said, "So much to be thankful for." I counted the chairs twice. There were 14, and there were 14 people, and I want to be fair here. Nobody left an empty one out for me. That would have been a different kind of message. This one was simpler than that. The dinner was the next night. The new place was 3/4 finished. West Superior, 4 blocks up from the original, in a building that had been a tire shop when I was working. They had the new tile down, and the walls up and taped, but there were work lights on stands in the corners and plastic sheeting stapled over the front windows, and the whole room smelled like joint compound and cold air. Her mother's name was in there with us. The sign was leaning against the drywall by the service door, face out, wrapped in plastic, waiting on the sign company. Marianne's, in raised white letters, and somebody had set a 5-gallon bucket of thinset against the bottom edge of it to keep it from sliding. They had put one long table down the middle of the room, folding tables pushed together with white cloths over them, and there were 15 people around it by 10 after 7. I knew 6 of them. Corinne, Grant, Lacey, Grant's sister, who runs the floor. Nadine Okafor, who came in as my daughter's partner 18 months ago and who paid for it with a settlement from a back injury. Warren Kubiak from 4 doors down on Piedmont, and his wife Bev, who ate my wife's rhubarb pie every July for 6 years. The other 9 were an investor named Ruthann Sturgis, who owns 3 self-storage facilities out on Central Entrance, a man from the sign company, the contractor and his foreman, a woman from the Neighborhood Business Association, 2 people I never did get placed, and a lawyer named Kurt Halloran, who sat on Grant's left with a folio in front of him and did not take his coat off all night. They sat me at the far end, next to the plastic on the window. I want to be careful how I describe the next part, because when you say it out loud, it sounds like nothing. I sat down and picked up the paper menu they had printed for the preview, and before I had it open, my daughter reached over, took it out of my hand, and said to the table, "I already told them what he's having." Then she said, to Ruthann Sturgis in a normal voice, the voice you'd use about the weather. She said, "He doesn't do great with menus anymore." Ruthann Sturgis smiled at me the way you smile at somebody in a wheelchair when you are holding a door. That was 10 after 7. For the next 40 minutes, nobody at that table asked me a question. I want to tell you what I did during those 40 minutes, because it is the only useful thing I did all night. I read the room the way I read a loss. The contractor's foreman had a punch list on a clipboard beside his plate, and there were more items on it than there should have been 11 days out from an opening. The hood system over the line was not vented yet. Halloran had his folio open a half-inch, and there were 3 yellow flags sticking out of the top edge of the stack inside it, and a lawyer does not put flags on a document he is not planning to have signed that evening. And Nadine Okafor, who was the only person at that table who had put in her own money, was not being talked to either. At 10 of 8, Grant stood up with his glass to say a few words about the second location. He thanked the contractor. He thanked Ruthann. He said the build-out came in at $410,000, and that they had closed the gap with, and I am giving you his exact phrase, family participation, $60,000, from Corinne's dad. 15 people looked at me and put their hands together. I had not been asked for $60,000. I had been told to bring money in an 11-word text message. He announced it in a room full of witnesses so that saying no would cost me more than saying yes. I let them clap. Then I took an envelope out of my inside pocket and set it on the tablecloth next to my plate, and I asked one question. I asked why my medical records had been sent to a company called Pell Family Holdings. The letter was from my clinic. It was a routine confirmation notice, the kind they mail out after a release is processed. 3 lines. It had come the Tuesday before. I have taken sworn statements from 400 people. I know what somebody looks like when a question surprises them. My daughter was not surprised. She put her fork down and she tilted her head about 10 degrees and she said, in a gentle voice, "Dad, you signed that at my kitchen table in August. I sat with you and I explained it twice." And Grant turned his phone around. There was a photograph on it. Me, at their kitchen table, August, in the blue shirt I wear, with papers in front of me, and a pen in my hand, and a cup of coffee at my elbow. The photograph was real. The date on it was real. I was at that table on the 22nd of August, and I did sign something, and I remembered signing it, because it was the extended warranty registration on their new convection oven, and I remembered it because Grant had asked me to look it over, and I had told him the labor coverage was worthless. Every fact in that photograph was true. It was the best piece of evidence I have ever seen assembled, and my son-in-law put it together with a phone in a kitchen for nothing. That was when Lacey came around behind my chair and put her hand on my shoulder. She had been crying, or she had gotten to where she could. She said it quietly, and quietly at that table meant everyone heard it. She said, "Emmett, do you have any idea what this is doing to her?" She was up at 3 in the morning last Tuesday. 3 in the morning, because of you. And in about 4 seconds I went from the man asking a question to the man doing the damage. Warren Kubiak looked at his plate. Bev Kubiak looked at Warren. Halloran took that as his cue and slid the stack across the tablecloth with 2 fingers and turned it so it faced me and set a pen on top of it. 3 yellow flags at the signature lines. I picked it up. It was a durable power of attorney, financial, general. I got to the 3rd page. Grant reached across the table, took my wife's reading glasses off my face, and let them go. You already know what that sounded like. Then he stood up to be helpful about it, and the chair caster went over the left lens, and he laughed the way you laugh at somebody else's toddler in a grocery store, and he said they were $12 at the drugstore. And Corinne looked at what I had in my hand and said they were glasses, and that her mother had been gone 3 years, and that I was making this harder than it had to be. Here is the thing about being 70 years old at the end of a folding table with 15 people watching. You do not get to be angry in that room. Angry is the thing they came for. Angry is a paragraph in a physician's letter. So I put the pieces in my shirt pocket, and I sat back down, and I said the only sentence available to me. I said, I don't sign what I can't read. Grant said he would read it out loud to me. Right there. I said that isn't the same thing, and everyone at that table over the age of 40 knew it wasn't, and Ruth Ann Sturgis said, well, that's fair, before she could stop herself, and for about 2 seconds, I had one person on my side of it. Then I gave them what they wanted. I said I'd sign at the opening, on the 12th, under her mother's name, with the lights on, with everybody there. I said it would mean something that way. I said, get a notary, do it right. I have never in my life watched 15 people relax at the same time. Halloran closed his folio. Grant reached over with the bottle and filled my glass without asking and started telling Ruth Ann Sturgis about the football team's offensive line. My daughter's shoulders came down 2 inches. Lacey took her hand off me and went to check on the kitchen that had no hood vent in it. They had walked in that night thinking they'd have to break an old man, and they left thinking he'd broken himself and thanked them for the chair. Corinne walked me to the door. The wind off the lake came around the corner of that building and went straight through the plastic sheeting. She reached up and straightened my collar, which she has not done since she was a teenager, and she said it kindly. That is the part I was not ready for. She said it kindly. She said, just come to the opening with money, Dad. That's all anybody's asking of you. I sat in my truck in the lot for a while with the engine off. Then I drove home, and I put the kettle on, and at 2 a.m. I was still at the kitchen table with the small brass lamp pulled down close and the pieces spread out on a dish towel in front of me. The frame was bent at the bridge, and I straightened it with my thumbs. The left lens was gone. The right one was fine. The arm had come apart at the same hinge I'd mended for her the March before she died. I got the spool of 40-pound monofilament out of the tackle box in the garage. It was the same spool. I put my head down under that lamp, and I mended my wife's glasses for the second time, twisted twice, pulled tight, the way she liked it, and when I was done I put them on and looked at the far wall, and everything on the right side of the room was clear, and everything on the left side was not. That was fine. I only needed one eye to read, and around 2:30 I went down the basement stairs and pulled open the second drawer of the filing cabinet, and I put my hand on a folder I had not opened in 3 years and 8 months. I was up at 5:20 on Saturday morning, and by 6:20 I had the clinic letter and the records release flat on the kitchen table under the brass lamp. You get the release form back as part of the notice packet. Most people throw the packet out. It is 2 sheets of paper and it looks like nothing, and mine had a photocopy of a signature at the bottom of the second sheet. Emmet de Rusk. I put on my wife's glasses and turned my head so the good lens sat where I needed it, and I brought the lamp down until it was about 8 inches off the page. I have looked at signatures for 41 years. In an insurance file, the signature is where the whole thing lives or dies, and I have sat across a table from a man in Grand Rapids and told him that the name on his proof of loss was not written by his wife and watched him decide whether to keep lying. So let me tell you what a real signature does. A real signature accelerates. Your hand starts heavy and gets light. You press hardest on the capital letter, and by the time you get to the tail you are barely on the paper, because you have written your own name so many thousand times that your hand is not working anymore. It is coasting. Look at your own sometime. The last 2 letters are usually a wire. The pressure on that page was even the whole way across. Start to finish. Same weight, like a fence. Second thing. There were 2 stops inside the loop of the capital E. Not 1. 2. Little bulbs of ink where the pen sat still for a quarter second and let a bit more out. A man signing his own name does not stop twice inside a letter he has been making since he was 6 years old. A man copying one stops when he looks up. Third thing, and this is the one that told me who did it and how. The whole signature sat below the ruled line. Not sitting on it, below it. And it sat exactly the same distance below it at the start as it did at the end, about a 16th of an inch, all the way across. A person writing freehand drifts. A person tracing off a sheet underneath does not drift, because the sheet underneath is not drifting either. It was just laid down a hair crooked. That signature was not written, it was drawn. Now, there was a second question in that kitchen, and it was the harder one, and I want to be honest that I sat with it for about 20 minutes before I did anything about it. The question was whether I was sure, because that is the trick of the thing they were building. Once a woman tells enough people that her father is slipping, every single thing he does afterward is evidence. If I was right, I was right. If I was wrong, I was a 70-year-old man alone in a basement kitchen at 6 in the morning, examining his own daughter's paperwork with a lamp, and there is a word for that man, and it is not a flattering one. So I did what I would have done on a file. I tore a sheet off the yellow pad, and I signed my name 10 times in a row, fast, without thinking about it, the way you sign at a counter. Then I looked at what I had made, 10 signatures, and not one of them matched another one. Different slant. The tail on the K, long, short, long, gone entirely on number 7. The J with a crossbar twice out of 10, and no crossbar the other 8. Number 4 ran uphill. Number 9 had the R and the U fused together. That is what a man's name looks like when a man writes it. It looks like 10 different men. And beside them, that photocopy. One flat, even, patient, careful, beautifully consistent Emmett J. Rusk. I did not need to be sure of anything about myself after that. The paper said it. That is the whole method, and it is the only thing I have ever been good at. You do not decide whether you believe the person. You read the page and see if the page says what they said it says. I wrote the date at the top of the yellow sheet and put both pages in a folder. Monday morning, I drove down to the original restaurant on Wadena Street with a shoebox on the passenger seat. The shoebox was Marianne's recipe cards, index cards, blue ink, 22 years of them, with grease spots and cross-outs and the number of servings scaled up to 400 in her handwriting. There is no world in which anybody throws an old man out of a restaurant when he is standing there holding his dead wife's recipe cards. It is the best cover I have ever had, and I did not have to invent one word of it. Corinne came out from the back and thanked me. She held the box for maybe 3 seconds and then set it on the end of the pass and turned around and went back to what she had been doing. I asked if I could sit and have a coffee. She said, "Of course, Dad." I took the last booth, the one behind the reach-in cooler, where you cannot be seen from the pass and you cannot be seen from the front door and where you can hear the back hallway, because the door to the alley does not sit right in the frame. I was there an hour and 10 minutes with a cup of coffee and a spiral notebook. At about 11:15, Grant went out the back door with his phone and stood on the landing. And there is maybe 12 feet of hallway between that landing and the back of that booth, and he was talking in the voice a man uses when he has run out of quieter voices. "I got 3 pieces of it," he said. "The 9th of February. That's the trial date. It's not moving." He said, "The demand's at 900. And then he said, "Just tell me straight. Does the gap kill us?" The gap? I sat there with my coffee going cold, and I did that arithmetic in about 4 seconds, because it is the arithmetic I did every working day for 4 decades. They had a liquor liability claim. It had to be. A restaurant with a trial date and a $900,000 demand is a dram shop case. Somebody overserved and somebody hurt, and in this state that is not covered by your general liability policy. It is a separate policy that you buy on purpose. Half the restaurant owners in America do not know that until the day they find out. And the gap is not a word you use about coverage you have. It is a word you use about coverage you did not have on one particular date. A policy cancels for non-payment. You send the money in 3 weeks late, and they reinstate you. But they reinstate you going forward. There is a hole in the middle where you were not insured. And if the night in question fell into that hole, then there is no carrier, no defense counsel paid for, no policy limits, nothing. It is just you and a jury and everything you own. Nobody was coming after my house because they were greedy. They were coming after my house because they were drowning, and the water was already at the chin. I sat in that booth another 20 minutes because I did not trust myself to stand up yet. And that is when I heard the other thing. And I have thought about it more than I have thought about the gap. Nadine was at the espresso machine, 10 feet from me, And she asked my daughter why she didn't bring me back into the kitchen to see the new dish machine. Just conversation. Filling a silence. And Corinne said this. And she was not performing. That is the part. There was nobody to perform for. She said it the way you say a thing you have said to yourself 100 times in the car. She said, I called him for 11 months after the funeral. Every single time. And every single time he talked about her. What she would have said. How she used to fold the towels. The way she did the Sunday roast. 11 months, Nadine. Not one time did he ask me how I was doing. I lost her too. I just never got to be the one who was allowed to be sad about it. Then the steam wand came on, and I could not hear anything else. I want to be careful here, because this is a channel where people come to watch somebody get what is coming to them, and I could tell you that she said that to manipulate a business partner, and you would believe me. She didn't. She was telling the truth. Every word of that was true. I know it was true because I could have told you the 11 months myself, and I could have told you what I talked about during them, and I had never once put those two facts next to each other on the same page. 41 years of reading documents. And there was a document sitting right there in front of me for 3 years that I had never once picked up. I put a $5 bill under the saucer and I got my coat and I went out through the front so I would not have to go past the alley door. I did not write anything down until I was in the truck. I want you to understand that I never recorded a word of it, then or later, not once. And that matters more than you would think for what comes after. I sat in the lot on Wadena Street and I wrote in the spiral notebook, Dram Shop, trial February 9th, demand 900,000, lapse, check dates. And under that, because I could not help it, I wrote, 11 months. Then I sat there another 40 minutes with the engine off while the inside of the windshield froze over from the edges in. At some point I noticed I could not see out of it anymore. And I could not tell you how long that had been true. Tuesday morning I called the clinic, and I did not call as a patient. I called the way I used to call a claims office. There is a thing people do not know they have. Under the federal privacy law, your provider has to give you an accounting of disclosures. That is the actual term. It is a list of every time your records went out the door, who they went to, and what the stated purpose was, and you can request it on the phone, and they have to produce it. I asked for mine going back 24 months, and I asked them to read me the last entry while I waited. The woman put me on hold for 4 minutes. Then she came back and read it off the screen in a flat voice, because to her it was a line item. Records released the 8th of November to Pell Family Holdings. Stated purpose, evaluation of cognitive capacity. And there was one more thing on my chart. An appointment. The 14th of January, 2 in the afternoon, 3rd floor of the medical building on East Superior, with a physician whose name I had never heard in my life. I did not make that appointment. I thanked her, and I asked her to mail me the full accounting, and I hung up, and I sat there with my hand still on the phone. Here is what I had been wrong about, and I had been wrong about it since Friday. I had been thinking this was a fight about $60,000, and then about a house, a fight about a thing. It was not a fight about a thing. Somebody had put me on a calendar. I spent that afternoon on the state's business filing database. I want you to picture what that actually looked like, because I know how these stories usually go. There was no hacking. There was no private detective. It is a public website that anybody in America can search from a kitchen table in their bathrobe, and I had searched it 4 days a week for 41 years, because when a claim comes in, the first thing you do is find out who actually owns the thing that burned. Pell Family Holdings, filed the 22nd of September. 2 members, Grant Pell and Corinne Rusk Pell, not Nadine Okafor. The woman who put her back injury settlement into that restaurant was not a member of the company that had just been formed. And then, filed and dated for effect at the end of the calendar year, a bill of sale and assignment moving the equipment, the inventory, the receivables, and the goodwill out of the restaurant company and into the new one. I sat back in that chair, and the whole shape of it came up off the page the way it does. The judgment lands in February against the restaurant company. By then, the restaurant company owns nothing, because everything walked across the street into a clean entity in December. The plaintiff gets a piece of paper against an empty shell, but that only works if the last real asset in the family is out of reach too. And the last real asset in the family is a paid-off house on Piedmont Heights with my name on it. That is what the power of attorney was for. And when a man with a power of attorney over him starts objecting, you do not need him to stop objecting. You just need a letter from a physician on the third floor. Then, it is not a power of attorney anymore. Then it is a conservatorship, which in this state is the one that takes your property and not your person, and it is decided by a judge who has 11 minutes for your file and a stack of 40 more behind it. $217,000 of my wife's money bought her daughter a restaurant. And the restaurant, when it started to sink, reached back for the house. Wednesday, I had lunch with Hollis Barnes at the Freighter Cafe on Garfield, the way I have most Wednesdays since about 1984. Hollis is 72. He drove a fuel truck for 35 years. He is the man who came over on the 3rd of February 3 years ago and sat in my kitchen and did not say anything for 2 hours, which is the correct thing to do, and almost nobody knows it. He was in a good mood. He got about halfway through his sandwich and told me, with his chin up, that Corinne had come by his place in October and had him sign a paper for the new location. Kitchen equipment, he said she told him it would move things along, and that she'd said he was the only person she could think of who'd say yes. He was proud. That is the piece of it I would like to take out of my head. A 72-year-old man was proud that somebody had found a use for him. I asked him where on the document he signed. He said he didn't remember, Emmett. There were flags on it. I asked him if it was an equipment lease, and he said he thought so. And I asked him if anybody had used the words personal guarantee, and he said he didn't think so, but that his eyes aren't what they were. He paid off that house on 6th Street in April. He told me about it 3 times that spring. I did not tell him anything at that table. I let him finish his sandwich, and I let him tell me about his grandson's hockey, and I have not decided yet whether that was a kindness or a cowardice. Wednesday evening I drove out to Delia Marchetti's place past Rice Lake. Delia worked 20 years as a fraud investigator for a national carrier, the Special Investigations side, which is where you go when the file stops making sense. She retired at 65 and keeps 11 chickens and has opinions about all of them. She is 68. I put it in front of her in order: the signature, the accounting of disclosures, the appointment on the 14th of January, Pell Family Holdings, the assignment, the dram shop trial on the 9th of February. Hollis. She listened for 40 minutes without interrupting, which nobody does. Then she said, "Today, police first, then the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center, then the county attorney's office. Today, Emmett." I said no. She said it again. She said it a 3rd time, and I am going to give you my 3 reasons the way I gave them to her, because if I do not, then everything I did afterward looks like a man who wanted the theater of it. I said, first, a 70-year-old man walks into a police station and says his daughter forged his name. The daughter's answer is already written, and she has been rehearsing it in front of investors for months. Her answer is, "My father is not well," and the complaint I filed becomes Exhibit 1 in the conservatorship petition. The paranoid old man went to the police about his own child. Delia did not argue with that one. She sat back and said she had watched it happen 4 times. Second, I said, say they open a case. Say it takes 8 weeks, which is fast. In 8 weeks, the assignment is complete. The new company is up and running, and the equipment lease still has Hollis Barnes's signature on the guarantee. Hollis loses his house in the spring while I am waiting on a detective to return a phone call. Third, I said, and I put the calendar on her kitchen table. The assignment closes at the end of the year. The trial is the 9th of February. Everything they need has to happen in the next 3 weeks, and everything is on paper, and paper has one thing going for it that people do not. Delia said, "Which is what?" I said, "Paper does not care whose side you're on. It just says what it says, and whoever filed first, filed first." She looked at me for a while. Then she said, "You're going to call all of them eventually." I said I would call every one of them. On the 13th of December, she said, "Not the 9th." I said no. On the 13th, I got home a little after 6. It had been dark since 4:20. I opened the hall closet to hang up my coat, and the back of my hand went across her winter coat, the gray one with the toggles, which has been hanging in there for 3 years and 10 months on the second hook from the left. I stood there with my hand on the sleeve. Then I sat down on the floor of that closet, which is a thing a 70-year-old man should not do because of what is involved in getting back up, and I put my hand in the right-hand pocket the way you do. There was a grocery list in it. Her handwriting. Ballpoint on the back of a church bulletin, folded in quarters. Milk. Yellow onions. AA batteries. Call Corinne. I sat on the floor of that closet for a long time. I want to say the true thing here, because it is the reason I am telling any of this. She was right. My daughter was right. In the 11 months after her mother died, she called me, and I talked about Marianne every single time, what she would have said, what she used to make on Sundays, and I did it to a 41-year-old woman who had just lost her mother and who had no place on this earth to set that down. I turned my wife's death into a thing that had happened to me, and I did it to the one other person it had happened to. I knew it at the time. That is the part. I was not confused. I was not slipping. I was not too sad to see it. I knew it while I was doing it, and I kept doing it, because it was the only conversation I could stand to have, and she was the only person I could stand to have it with. She stopped calling in January. I told people she got busy with the restaurant. She did not get busy. She got tired. I sat there, and I did not put a but on the end of it, and I want you to notice that, because there is a version of me that would have. There is a version where I say she was right, but she forged my name. Both of those are true, and neither one erases the other. And I am 70 years old, and I have finally learned that a man does not get to cancel one against the other like 2 entries on a page. After a while I got up. It took me 2 tries and the coat rail. I took the gray coat off the hook, and I folded it on the bed the way she folded things, arms in, then over, and I put it in a carton, and I ran the tape across it, and I wrote her name on the lid in marker. Then I went down the basement stairs. I pulled open the second drawer of that filing cabinet, and I took out a manila folder with a handwritten label on the tab, March 19. I did not open it in the basement. I carried it up and put it on the kitchen table under the brass lamp, and I looked at it for a minute with my coat still on. Then I put on my wife's glasses, and I turned my head so the good lens sat where I needed it. And I started reading. Lacey called me Wednesday afternoon, which she has never done, and asked whether I wanted to be in the photograph they were taking under the sign on opening night. I said I did. Then she said, in the middle of everything else, that I shouldn't call the restaurant the next week because she'd be running both locations herself. Corinne and Grant were flying out Wednesday night. A sourcing trip. Porto and then Seville. Olive oil and tinned fish and a ceramic supplier. 8 days. Paid for by Ruth Ann Sturgis and non-refundable. They'd land Thursday the 11th at 3 in the afternoon. The loan closing was Friday the 12th. The opening was Friday the 12th. I wrote 3 numbers on the back of an envelope and put it in my shirt pocket. 3, 11, 12. 8 days they'd be on the other side of an ocean. One day they'd be back. One day everything closed. Reeve Adeyemi has 2 chairs, a desk, and a printer that is older than the practice. He does small business and estates out of a second-floor office on East Superior with a radiator that knocks. He is 51. I picked him because he is the only lawyer in this town who has never once tried to sell me anything. Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, I put the folder on his desk and said one sentence. I said, I need you to tell me whether this is still good. He opened it. Inside was a secured promissory note dated the 19th of March, 3 years and 9 months earlier, $217,000. Interest at 3.4%, which was the applicable federal rate that month, which is the number the government publishes, so that a loan inside a family is a loan and not a gift, payable on demand after 36 months. And under it, 4 pages of security agreement, collateral, all equipment, all inventory, all accounts receivable, and all general intangibles of the restaurant company, and clipped behind that a filing acknowledgement from the Minnesota Secretary of State, a UCC financing statement, stamped the 19th of March. The ink on the stamp had gone a little brown in 3 years and 9 months in a basement. Adeyemi read all of it. Then he turned to his computer and ran a lean search on the restaurant company and sat looking at the screen with his hand over his mouth. He said, Mr. Rusk, there are 2 filings against this company. I said I know. Tell me the dates. He said, yours is March, 3 years ago. The bank's is May of the following year, 14 months behind you. Then he said the 3 things I had driven down there to hear. The first thing, a financing statement is good for 5 years from the day it's filed, and mine was 3 years and 9 months old. I had 15 months left on it, 15 months of the one long run of luck a man gets. The second thing, priority in this country is not decided by who is owed the most, or who is family, or who has the better story. It is decided by who filed first. I filed first. The third thing was the one I had not been sure of, and it is the one I want you to hear if you hear nothing else in this whole account. I asked him what happens when a company moves all of its equipment and inventory into a brand new company at the end of the year. He said, "Nothing happens. Not to you. A security interest follows the collateral. They can sell it, assign it, put it in a new entity, drive it across a state line. It goes where the equipment goes. Whoever holds it now holds it subject to you." I sat in that chair and I thought about a man in Hibbing with photographs of $11,000 of tools. You cannot move the thing out from under the paper. The paper is attached to the thing. Now, Adeyemi talks like a lawyer, and this whole story falls apart if you don't have this in plain words. So let me put it the way I put it back to him across that desk, because he nodded at it, and that is how I knew I had it right. 3 years ago, I loaned my daughter that money against everything in her kitchen. Nobody read it. And nobody in this country gets a new loan on a business until the last man in line gets paid first. I am the last man in line. I have been the last man in line since March. Then Adeyemi asked the question I had not thought to ask, and it turned out to be the hinge of the whole thing. He said, "How did the bank lend against this in the first place? They'd have run the same search I just ran. They'd have seen you sitting in first position." I said I didn't know. He picked up the phone and called a woman he knows who does closings, and he asked her a general question about general practice, and he hung up and told me what happens about half the time in this country. The bank runs the search. The bank sees a family filing. The bank asks the borrower about it. The borrower says, "Oh, that's my dad, that was paid back a long time ago." And the bank writes it in the file and moves on, because the loan officer has 11 files on his desk and a number to hit, and he never asks the borrower to produce a termination statement. There is no termination statement. There has never been a termination statement because there has never been a payment. My daughter told a bank 2.5 years ago that a debt was satisfied when it was not satisfied. In writing, in an email that is still sitting in a file on somebody's server on Superior Street. I did not do anything with that. I want to be plain about it. I did not send it anywhere. I did not print it. I never touched it. I did not have to. There was going to be a woman from that bank standing in that room on the 12th of December, and she was going to work it out for herself in about 4 seconds. We drew 3 documents that morning. A formal demand letter, principal of $217,000, accrued interest of $22,134, for a total of $239,134. And then the line that goes at the bottom of every real demand letter, and that nobody outside the business has ever seen, plus per diem interest of $20.21 per day until paid. $20.21 every day. Including the 8 days they were going to be in Portugal. A UCC amendment to extend the collateral description to after acquired property and proceeds, which is the language that reaches new equipment bought with old money, and a lien status letter addressed to the commercial lender handling their expansion loan, stating the amount required to release my interest. Adeyemi asked when I wanted them sent. I took the envelope out of my shirt pocket and put it on his desk with the 3 numbers facing him. I said, "File the amendment today. Hold the demand letter and the lender letter until the 5th. Send them by certified mail so they land while the family is out of the country and nobody is home to sign for anything." He filed the amendment at 11 o'clock that morning. Then I drove to the credit union on Central Entrance and did the thing I have not told you about yet. I opened a home equity line of credit against my house, the paid-off one, the one on Piedmont Heights that my wife and I burned the paper on in 1998 and went out for the family dinner for $60,000. Adeyemi had argued with me about it for 10 minutes that morning. He said Hollis Barnes's guarantee was not my legal problem. He said I was putting the only unencumbered asset I had left on the table in a fight where the other side was actively trying to take it. He said, and he was right, that if any single piece of this went sideways, I would be 70 years old with a mortgage. I told him that a man named Hollis Barnes sat in my kitchen for 2 hours on the 3rd of February 3 years ago and did not say one word, and that I had not asked him to do that either. The equipment lease payoff was $58,940. I had him call North Shore Restaurant Equipment Leasing and get the exact figure, and get them to sign a release of guarantee, executed and dated, to be held in his office until I said otherwise. At the door, Adeyemi said one more thing to me. He said, "You understand that none of this puts anybody in jail. This is a lien. It's paper. It doesn't arrest anyone." I said jail is somebody else's department, and I'd be calling that department on the 13th. He asked what was on the 12th. I said a table. I got home a little after 4. It was already dark. The house was very quiet. The carton with her name on the lid was still on the bed where I had left it, because I had not decided where it goes. I made a chicken thigh, and I ate it standing at the counter, and I put my wife's glasses in the dish by the salt cellar, and I waited for the phone to ring. It did not ring Thursday night. It rang at 10 minutes past 4 on Friday morning. My father-in-law's cane had been hanging on a nail in my garage since 1991. Ash wood, brass ferrule, worn down on the right side because he was a right-side leaner. Thursday afternoon I took it down and wiped the dust off it with a shop rag and walked the length of my hallway with it about 40 times. It is harder than it looks. A man who does not need a cane uses it like a prop, and it shows immediately, because he plants it and then walks past it. A man who needs one plants it and waits on it. There is a hesitation in the middle of the stride, about a quarter second, and everything is in that quarter second. I timed myself with the stopwatch on the microwave. 100 feet down the hall and back, normal, was 29 seconds. With the cane doing it right, it was 51, 22 seconds. That was the whole difference between the man I am and the man they had been describing to people for 4 months. I want to say something about this part before I tell you the rest of it, because I know how it plays. It plays like a caper. Old man dusts off a cane, plans a con, cue the music. It did not feel like that. It felt like getting dressed up as the corpse at your own wake. Friday morning, 10 past 4. The phone went off on the nightstand. Porto is 6 hours ahead. She was standing in a hotel lobby at 10 in the morning with a coffee, and I was in the dark in my bedroom, 70 years old, sitting up with my feet on a cold floor. She said, "Dad, what the hell is a financing statement amendment?" The bank had run a lien search that Wednesday afternoon, the way they do before every closing on earth, and there was my filing sitting in first position, plus an amendment filed at 11 o'clock that same morning, and somebody in that bank's underwriting department had emailed my daughter about it. I had about 2 seconds, and what I did in those 2 seconds is the thing I have to tell you, and I do not enjoy telling it. I became the man she had been telling everyone I was. I did not deny it. I went the other way. I let my voice go slow and thin, and I said I had been on the computer trying to find her mother's pension, the retirement, the thing at the school district, and the website kept asking me questions, and I kept clicking on things. And I was sorry. I didn't know I'd done anything. She said, "Dad, that's not the pension site. That's the Secretary of State." I said, I know. I don't know how I got there." And then I put the bait down. I said what I was actually trying to do was figure out how to move some money over to her for the opening, the $60,000, and I could not work the bank's website, and I didn't want to ask anybody at the branch because they talk to you like you're a child. I said, "When you get home, will you sit down with me and do it?" There was a pause of maybe 3 seconds in a hotel lobby in Portugal. Greed does a very specific thing to suspicion. It does not argue with it. It just walks in front of it. Her voice changed. It got warm. She said, "Of course I will. Dad, don't touch the computer again, okay? I'll do it Friday. We'll sit down Friday and do the whole thing." I said, "Okay, sweetheart." She said, "It's okay. It's not your fault." And then she said, away from the phone, to someone in the lobby, "Tell Nadine to stop by the bank Thursday when we land." Then she hung up. Here is what that phone call cost me. And there were 2 things, and neither one of them was small. The first one, I had just told my daughter, out loud, on a recorded international call from a hotel, 6 days before I needed 40 people in a room to believe the opposite, that I could not use a computer and did not know where I had been on the internet. If any part of the 12th went wrong, that call was the first thing a lawyer would play. I had handed them the exhibit. I had built it for them and put it in their hands, and I had done it on purpose. And I had done it because I could not think of anything better in 2 seconds at 10 past 4 in the morning. That is the part nobody tells you about being 70. You do not get to fight clean. The whole board is tilted before you sit down, and the only moves you have left are the ones that use the tilt. The second thing, Nadine Okafor was going to stop by that bank on Thursday, and she was going to be told what the underwriting department had found, and Nadine Okafor is not a fool. She put her own settlement money into that restaurant, and her name is not on the new company. I did not plan for Nadine. I want to be honest about that, because if I tell this well enough, it will sound like I built every piece of it, and I did not. I built the paper. Everything else was people finding out things in an order I did not control. I sat in the kitchen with the light off until the sky went gray over the neighbor's garage, which at that time of year is about 7:20. Delia came by Saturday with a flat of eggs. She did not ask about the plan. She did not ask about the 12th. She put the eggs on my counter and told me the brown ones were from the 2 Orpingtons and the pale green ones were from a bird she calls Nancy. And I said, an egg is an egg, and she said that was the single most ignorant thing she had heard out of me in 9 years, and we went around about that for a while. She washed the cup she'd used. She got her coat. At the door she said, the 13th. I said the 13th. She said, you call me first, and then you call them. In that order. The following week, I did 4 things, and every one of them had an audience. Monday I went into the Wadena Street restaurant with the cane and let Lacey take my coat and hang it up. She called me sweetie twice. Tuesday and again on Thursday I called Corinne in Spain and asked her the same question both times, on purpose, about what time the photographer was coming on the 12th. The second time she answered it very patiently. Wednesday I mailed her a birthday card 3 weeks early. Her birthday is in January. I wrote the wrong year inside it, and I sat at that table for a minute after I wrote it, looking at it. And starting Monday I carried cartons out of my house and put them in the bed of my truck in broad daylight, 1 or 2 a day, where Warren and Bev Kubiak could see me from their kitchen window. Because what a neighborhood needs to see, when a family is getting ready to say a man cannot manage his own affairs, is that man packing up his house. The cartons had blankets in them. I drove them to a storage unit on Central Entrance, and I drove the empty truck home. Except one of them, the one with her name on the lid. That one I did not put in the truck. That one went in the hall closet, on the floor, under where the coat used to hang, and I want to tell you it was because I hadn't decided, and it was not. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was keeping her in the house. Thursday the 11th, they landed at 3 in the afternoon. The certified letters had been sitting at the post office since Monday, with nobody home to sign for them. The lien status letter had gone straight to the lender the same day, and somebody there had read it on Monday morning, and the Friday closing had been on hold since about 10 o'clock Monday, and nobody had told the borrowers because the borrowers were on the other side of an ocean. Nadine went to the bank Thursday afternoon. I know that because Nadine Okafor called me at 6 o'clock Thursday evening and asked me one question. She asked me what Pell Family Holdings was. I told her I couldn't help her with that, and that she should ask her lawyer, tonight, not tomorrow. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, I don't have a lawyer, Emmett. I said get one before dinner tomorrow. At about 11:30 that night, I got in the truck and drove down to West Superior. The sign company had been out that afternoon. The lights were on it. Testing. Mary Ann's, in raised white letters, 11 feet across, over the door of a room that had cost $410,000, 60 of which was supposed to come out of my pocket the next evening. I parked across the street and left the engine running for the heat, and I sat there and looked at my wife's name. I had been telling myself for 8 days that it was paper and it was clean and it was arithmetic. A lien is arithmetic. Priority is arithmetic. $20.21 a day is arithmetic. But the 12th was not going to be arithmetic. The 12th was going to be a room with 40 people in it and my daughter in the middle of it. And I was going to take everything she had built out from under her, in public, underneath her mother's name, in white letters. Mary Ann would have had something to say about that. I sat there a long time trying to work out what it would have been, and I could not get it to come, and that frightened me more than anything else that had happened in 8 days. 3 years I had been able to hear her say things. That night I could not. I drove home a little before 1. The next morning I took the cane and put it back on the nail in the garage. They had the plastic off the windows by 6. I sat in my truck across West Superior from 20 of 7 until 10 of, and watched the room fill up through the glass. It was 19 degrees out. There were 41 people in there by the time I went in. and I counted them from the truck, because counting is what I do when I do not want to feel anything. The sign was up and lit. The hood system had been vented that Tuesday. There were strings of bulbs over the bar and a table by the door with little cards on it that said Mary Ann's, Lincoln Park, established, and the year her restaurant opened, not the year she was born, which I noticed, and then made myself stop noticing. Ruth Ann Sturgis was there. Warren and Bev Kubiak were there, and Bev had done her hair. Kurt Halloran had his coat off this time. There was a young man from the neighborhood paper with a camera bag, and the contractor, and the woman from the business association, and about 25 people I did not know. There were 3 people in that room I want you to hold on to. The first was a woman named Priscilla Whitcomb, who is the commercial relationship manager at the bank on Superior Street, in a navy suit, standing near the bar with a glass of water she never drank out of. She had been sent to collect a piece of paper. The second was a mobile notary, a woman in her 60s with a canvas tote and a stamp box, sitting at the far end of the bar on a stool, being paid by the hour to be at a restaurant opening. The third was Hollis Barnes, in a borrowed sport coat with the sleeves an inch too long, standing by the coat rack because he did not know anybody and did not want to sit down first. Nadine Okafor was there too. She came in at 5 of 7 and did not take her coat off and stood against the back wall. I want to tell you what was in Grant Pell's leather folio that night, in the order he had it stacked, because it explains everything about how that room went. On top, a UCC termination statement, prepared by Halloran, ready for my signature and the notary's stamp. That was the emergency. That was the piece of paper my daughter had promised a bank on the phone from Portugal. Under it, the lease amendment for the landlord. Under that, the durable power of attorney, with 3 yellow flags in it, which by that night had become almost sentimental. They had 8 days of a plan they had built in a hotel lobby, and the plan was that a confused old man, who could not work a website, was going to sit down at table 1 under his wife's name, in front of 40 people, and sign whatever was put in front of him, because who says no in a room like that? They were right about the room. Nobody says no in a room like that. I came in at 8 minutes of 7. I did not have the cane. I had the vest I wore to her funeral, taken in at the sides by a tailor on 4th Street who has been doing my clothes since the 80s. I had shaved. I had a manila envelope in my inside pocket, and a cashier's check in my shirt pocket, and my wife's glasses folded in the breast pocket of that vest with the fishing line showing. And I walked the length of that room at 29 seconds to the 100 feet, past 41 people, and I pulled out my own chair and sat down without putting a hand on anything. My daughter saw it before anybody else did. She was mid-sentence with the reporter, and she looked up, and her face came apart for about half a second. Not fear. I want to be accurate. It was arithmetic. It was a woman recalculating. And then she put it back together and finished her sentence about sourcing ceramics in Seville. Grant did not notice. Grant was in a good mood. He came over and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "There he is," and asked if I wanted a drink, and told me they'd do the photograph under the sign at 8. At about 20 past 7, he sat down across from me, opened the folio, took out the top sheet, turned it around, and set a pen on top of it. He said it warmly. He said, "Just a housekeeping thing, Emmett. Bank needs it tonight. 60 seconds. And Priscilla Whitcomb, who had been standing 8 feet away for 40 minutes doing nothing at all, took 2 steps closer. I took my wife's glasses out of my breast pocket and put them on. The left lens was gone. The frame was mended at the hinge with 40-pound monofilament, twisted twice, pulled tight, and it sat crooked on my face, and I had ye turn my head about 15 degrees to the right to get the good lens over the page. Nobody at that table said anything about it. And I read the whole thing, front to back. It took a little over 4 minutes, and if you have never sat at a table with 41 people in a room and read a document in silence for 4 minutes, I can tell you that it is longer than you think. Somebody's fork went down. The music was still going. Bev Kubiak stopped talking and I heard her stop. It was a termination statement. It said that the secured party of record released all collateral covered by the financing statement filed on the 19th of March. I set it down and slid it back across the tablecloth, face up, unsigned. Then I reached into the folio, which nobody expected, and took out the third document from the bottom of the stack, the one with the 3 yellow flags, and I put that on the table in front of me, and I turned to page 4, and I read one clause out loud. I did not editorialize. I read it the way I have read 400 policy exclusions out loud to 400 people who did not want to hear them. Flat, slow, with my head turned 15 degrees to the right. It was the clause that authorized the attorney-in-fact to transfer, convey, and assign the principal's real property, including to the attorney-in-fact himself. Then I stopped reading and put the paper down. Kurt Halloran said, "That's boilerplate." I said it is not boilerplate. It is an optional paragraph, and somebody checked a box to put it in there. Halloran did not say anything else that evening. Then I did the two things I had driven down there to do. I took the cashier's check out of my shirt pocket and laid it face down on the tablecloth next to the bread plate, and I set the manila envelope on top of it. My daughter reached over and turned the check face up, and I watched her eyes do it in 2 stages, and the second stage is the one I will be seeing for a while. First she read the amount, $58,940, close enough to 60 that for about 1 second she thought it was hers, and something moved in her face that was almost relief. Then she read the payee line, North Shore Restaurant Equipment Leasing, and under that, on the memo line, in the small print on the bottom left of a cashier's check where nobody ever looks, it said, Account 4471, Pay off in full, Release of Guarantee, Hey Barnes. She looked up at me. She said, "What is this?" And across the room by the coat rack, Hollis Barnes heard his own name from 30 feet away and stood up a little straighter, because a man does, and he did not know a single thing about what was happening yet. Then Grant opened the envelope, because he was the one who reached for it, and that is worth something too. There were 4 things in it. A photocopy of a filing acknowledgement from the Minnesota Secretary of State, stamped the 19th of March, 3 years and 9 months earlier. A demand letter dated the 5th of December, $239,134, plus $20.21 per day. A copy of the lien status letter that had gone to their lender the same day, which was the reason their closing had been sitting on hold since 10 o'clock Monday morning, which was the reason Priscilla Whitcomb was standing in that room in a Navy suit. And an executed release of guarantee from North Shore Restaurant Equipment Leasing, signed and dated the 9th of December, releasing Hollis Barnes, conditioned on payment of $58,940. Grant read the first page and went a color I had not seen on a man since a garage fire in Cloquet in 1994. He said, "You can't do this." I said I did it on the 19th of March. You were at the table. You had a cup of coffee. Priscilla Whitcomb read the top edge of that demand letter from 4 feet away, upside down, the way bankers read things. She did not say a word. She took her phone out of her jacket, and she walked out of that room, down the hall past the restrooms, and she did not come back to the table for the rest of the night. And the landlord, a man named Doyle who owns 3 buildings on that stretch and had been sitting 2 chairs down waiting on a lease amendment, watched her go, and then looked down at the paper in front of him and put his pen back in his coat pocket. 41 people in that room, and the music was still playing, and the young man from the neighborhood paper had stopped taking pictures and was holding his camera against his chest with both hands. 41 people knew something had happened, and not one of them knew what. That is the strangest part of it. The music kept going. A server came through with a tray of the little smoked trout things and did a full circuit of the room because nobody had told her not to, and people took them off the tray and held them without eating them. They fell in an order, and the order matters, so I will give it to you the way it came. Nadine went first. She had been against the back wall in her coat since 5 of 7, and she came off that wall and walked up to the table and did not look at me at all. She looked at Grant. She said, "What is Pell Family Holdings?" Grant said this wasn't the time. She said she'd been to the bank yesterday afternoon, and she said the name of the underwriter she'd spoken to, and then she asked her second question, and you could hear that she had gotten it off her phone in a parking lot and had been carrying it around for 26 hours waiting to use it. She said, "When you move everything a company owns into a different company before a trial, what is that called?" Halloran started to say something about how he couldn't advise anyone at this table. Nadine said, "I'm asking what it's called." Nobody answered her, so I did, because she had put her own settlement money in that kitchen, and nobody in that room had told her one true thing in 6 months. I said in this state, they call it a voidable transaction, and there is a statute, and her lawyer would find it in about 4 minutes. Nadine said, "I got a lawyer this morning." Then she said one more thing to my daughter, and it was not loud, and it was the worst sentence spoken in that room all night. She said, "I asked you 3 times if I should be on the new one. 3 times, Corinne." And she got her bag off the back wall and she went out the front door, and the little bell over it went, and 40 people watched a partner leave a restaurant on its opening night in her coat. Grant went second. I slid 2 pieces of paper down the bar to the notary. I want to be careful here, because I know what people expect. They expect the notary to look at it and announce to the room that it is a forgery. She did not do that. She could not do that, and she would have been wrong to, and if she had, the whole thing would have gone sideways in a way that would have taken me 2 years and $40,000 to fix. What I gave her was the records release with the drawn signature on it, and a bar napkin. I signed my name on that napkin 4 times in front of her while she watched. Not fast, not slow, the way you sign at a counter. She looked at the 4 on the napkin. She looked at the photocopy. She looked at the 4 again. Then she closed the lid on her stamp box. She said one sentence, and she said it to Grant, not to me. And she used the exact words of her own trade, which is what a person does when they have been in a trade a long time and they are careful. She said, "I'm not going to be able to notarize anything here tonight." And she picked up her tote and she got down off that stool and she moved 4 seats away down the bar and sat with her back half turned, and she stayed there the rest of the evening, which was somehow worse than if she had left. That is when Grant said it, not to me. To Halloran, and louder than he meant to, the way a man's voice goes when the floor moves. He said, it was her idea. She told me he'd never look at it. The room heard that. Ruth Ann Sturgis heard it. The reporter heard it. And he had put the camera down 40 minutes earlier and was writing on the back of one of the little cards from the table by the door. My daughter looked at her husband from 4 feet away, with an expression I have not got a word for. Then they wanted to know what it meant, all of them. And this is the part where I had to actually talk, and it is the only part of the night I had rehearsed. Doyle, the landlord, asked me first, because he had a lease amendment in front of him and a personal guarantee in the original lease, and he had just watched a banker leave the room. So I explained it. Not as a father. In the voice I used for 41 years to tell people why their claim was denied, which is a flat voice, and which I have been told is a hard thing to listen to, and which is the only voice I had that was going to hold up in that room. I said there is a dram shop suit with a trial date of the 9th of February and a demand of $900,000. I said liquor liability is not covered by a general liability policy in this state. It is a separate policy that you buy on purpose. I said the policy canceled for non-payment on the 20th of May and reinstated on the 3rd of July, and the incident was the 14th of June, and a reinstatement runs forward, not backward. I said, which means there is no carrier, no defense counsel, and no policy limits behind that trial date. There is nothing behind it but the assets of the company. And I said the assets of the company have a lien on them, dated the 19th of March, 3 years and 9 months ago, in first position, in the amount of $239,134, and no expansion loan is going to close over it. And moving those assets into a new entity does not move them out from under it, because the security interest follows the collateral. Doyle asked me one question. He asked whether the guarantee on the original lease was personal. I told him he should ask his own attorney, and that if he did it tonight, he'd be ahead of everybody else in the room. He was on his phone in the hallway before I finished the sentence. Then people started to leave. Not all at once, and not dramatically. That is not how it goes. 2 people found their coats, and then 4 more. And then it was the kind of leaving where everybody says a warm thing to the host on their way out and does not make eye contact while they say it. Bev Kubiak touched my arm on the way past and didn't say anything, and Warren didn't touch my arm, and I understood both of them. The reporter stayed until almost the end. He came over before he left and asked if I would give him a phone number, and I said no. Hollis Barnes came over at some point and stood next to my chair, and he still did not understand what had happened, only that his name had been read out loud. He said, "Emmett, what's this about my house?" I said I'd tell him Wednesday at the freighter. He said, "Is it bad?" I said no. I said it's the one part of tonight that isn't. My daughter caught up with me at the coat rack. She had her hand on my sleeve, on the cuff of the funeral vest, and she was not shouting. I had spent 8 days preparing for shouting. She did not talk about the money. She did not say one word about the lien or the trial or the 60,000. She said, 11 months, Dad. She said, I called you for 11 months. She said, you had one job after she died, and it was to be there, and you weren't, and now you show up here, on tonight, with a folder. She was crying by the end of it. Her hand did not come off my sleeve. And I want to tell you what I said, because there were about 4 answers available to me, and I have thought about whether I took the right one every single day since. I said, you're right. I said I did that. I said I turned your mother's death into something that happened to me, and I did it to the one other person on earth it happened to, and I knew I was doing it while I was doing it. I told her I owe her that it is a real debt, and that I will be carrying it when they put me next to her mother. And then I said the other thing. I said, but that debt is not this debt, and I am not paying it with Hollis Barnes's house. I said that check on the table is the last money I will ever hand you, and it does not even have your name on it. She did not let go of my sleeve. She held on for a while longer, and I did not pull it away, and I did not say anything else. I just stood there and waited until she was the one who let go. She let go. Lacey brought my coat and handed it to me without looking up from the floor, and that was the last time I saw Lacey. Outside it had started to snow, straight down, no wind off the lake for once. I stood under my wife's name in raised white letters for a second, because the truck was across the street, and I had to wait for a car. I did not look up at it. I made 4 phone calls on Saturday the 13th of December, starting at 8 in the morning. I called Delia Marchetti first, because I had told her I would and because she had asked for that order. Then the Duluth Police Department. Then the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center, which is the state's number for this, and which I would like every person watching this to write down somewhere, because most people do not know it exists until they need it, and then they cannot find it. Then the county attorney's office, where I left a message and got a call back the following Tuesday from a woman who asked me to bring in the original release with the drawn signature and the yellow legal pad with 10 of my own signatures on it. I had not thrown that pad away. I want to make a point of that. I had dated it the morning I made it, the 29th of November, and that date turned out to matter more than anything else in the file, because it was 2 weeks before anybody had a reason to make one. That is the whole trade. 41 years of it. Write the date on the thing when you make it, not when you need it. Here is what happened, and I am going to do it quickly, because none of it is the point. The expansion loan never closed. It could not close over a first position lien, and the termination statement never got signed, and on the 18th of December the bank withdrew the commitment. Doyle called the personal guarantee on the West Superior lease in January. The assignment into Pell Family Holdings was unwound in February on Nadine Okafor's motion. Her lawyer used the statute. It took 11 weeks, and it cost her money she did not have. On the 9th of February, a jury came back for the plaintiff in the dram shop case in the amount of $610,000. There was no carrier behind it, for exactly the reason I had read off a page in a back booth in November. The State Alcohol and Gambling Enforcement Division took an interest in the license after that, and that was the end of both locations. Grant Pell was charged in March with aggravated forgery. He pleaded to a lesser count in June and got probation and restitution, which is what happens, and anybody who tells you otherwise has not sat in a county courthouse on a Tuesday. Corinne filed for divorce in April. The Wadena Street restaurant sold at auction in June for $291,000, and a first position secured creditor gets paid before anybody else in the line. So I was paid $239,134, and the per diem, which by then had run to a little over $4,000 more. That is the arithmetic. It took 7 months, and I did not attend any of it. The check to North Shore cleared on the 15th of December. The release of guarantee was recorded 3 days before the leasing company sent out its demand letters, and Hollis Barnes's name was not on the list when they went out. He still did not fully understand it in April. We were on his front porch on 6th Street, the one with the bad step, and it was the first warm afternoon of the year, and he asked me one more time to explain what he had signed in October. I told him he had signed a personal guarantee, and that if he had still been on it in January, he would have lost that house. Hollis looked out at his street for a while. Then he said, "You didn't have to do that." I said no. He said, "You put your own house up." I said I got it back. And he said, "You didn't know you'd get it back." I did not have an answer for that one, so I didn't give him one. And we sat on that porch another 20 minutes and talked about his grandson's hockey. And that is the last we have ever said about it. That is how men our age handle things. You get one sentence about it and then you never mention it again, and both of you know. I kept 60,000 of what came back to clear the line of credit on my house. The rest of it went into a fund at Homecroft Elementary in my wife's name. Here is what it does. It covers the gap for the children who do not qualify for free lunch, but whose families cannot actually pay for it either. There is a whole category of child in this country who is $100 a year over the line on a form, and my wife covered those children out of her own pocket for 19 years and never once told me she was doing it. I found out from the district office when I went in to set the thing up, from a woman who assumed I already knew. 19 years, $31 a month for the insurance, and whatever the lunches came to on top of it, out of the same envelope. I have thought about that more than I have thought about the lien. In July, I had to run out to a supply place on Garfield, and the way back took me down Wadena Street. They were pulling the letters off the front of the old building. There was a man on a ladder and a fellow on the sidewalk with a hand truck, and they had gotten the first 2 letters down, and the rest of her name was still up there. I saw it from about a block away. I did not slow down. So, that is the whole thing, and I want to leave you with the part that is actually useful, because it is not the lien and it is not the check. It is this. People hand you paper on the assumption that you will not read it. That assumption is correct almost every time, and it is most correct when the person handing it to you is somebody you love, because that is exactly when it feels like an insult to read it. I got very lucky. I got lucky because I happened to spend my working life in the one trade where reading the page is the whole job, and so on the 19th of March, at a kitchen table, 6 weeks after I buried my wife, with my daughter crying and holding my hand with both of hers, I did the thing I would have done for a stranger. I have thought about whether that makes me cold. I have decided it does not. I gave her every dollar my wife left behind. I did not hold a thing back. I only wrote down what it was. And the other piece, the one that cost me more. There are 2 kinds of debt, and they do not cancel each other out. I owed my daughter something real. She was right about the 11 months, and she is still right about it. And being right about it did not entitle her to my house. And my owing it did not oblige me to pay it with a 72-year-old man's home on 6th Street. A man does not get to run those 2 entries against each other and call the page balanced. I am 71 now, and that took me my whole life. So here is what I would ask you to do this week. Go find the last 3 things you signed. Not read them, find them. Most people cannot, and that is the actual problem. And if it has been a while since one of your children called you first, and you have been carrying that around, tell me about it in the comments. This channel is full of people carrying the same thing, and you would be surprised what it does to set it down where somebody can see it. Her glasses are on the sill over the kitchen sink now, next to the shoebox with the recipe cards in it, which came back to me in June with the rest of the kitchen. The left lens is still gone. I never had it replaced. I only ever needed the one eye to read.